Hello, I'm Dr. Missick, the pastor of King of Saints Tabernacle here in Cleveland, Texas. And tonight we're going to begin with a teaching about the significance of the tabernacle and tabernacles and what it means and its relevance for today. So we're going to begin by talking about the High Holy Days, the Moedim. So what are the High Holy Days? And this is starting with trumpets, which is Yom Teruah, the sounding of the trumpets. And then you go to Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And this is the day when they brought the offering before the Ark of the Covenant. And take a look at our model of the Ark of the Covenant. This is the model of the Ark of the Covenant my father made. And under it we have the replica of the incense altar. So you have the incense altar, you had the veil, and then within the veil you had the Ark of the Covenant, where you had the mercy seat surrounded by the two cherubim, and of course the Ark is a box or container that holds the law. And so the blood of a bull and a goat was sprinkled upon the mercy seat on the lid of the cherubim to atone for the sins, first of the high priest, but then of all the people. That was the meaning of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So I want to go through this presentation of the High Holy Days. And as I mentioned, it begins with the blasting of the shofar. And there's an important verse or chapter that deals with kind of a re-inauguration of the covenant under Ezra and Nehemiah. Nehemiah built a pulpit, and he brought the law of Moses in the form which we know it now. He searched out and discovered the law, and he was sanctioned by the king of Persia to go and instruct the people in the law of Moses, which is what he did. We see this picture of Ezra reading from the law of Moses, and men and women and children who had understanding were there listening to the instruction of the Torah. And this is probably the beginning of course, the Torah goes back to Moses, but it had been lost many times in the Old Testament period. So this is the beginning of Judaism as we know it today under Ezra, and a lot of customs that Jewish people observe. We have the idea of the Great Sanhedrin, started by Ezra, and the Torah portions. They believe that Ezra created the Torah portions, which is reading through the Torah throughout a whole year. And so I kind of wonder if what kind of evidence there is that the modern Torah portions correspond with the one from Jesus' day or Yeshua's day. I don't know if we know for certain, but it seems very clear based on what James the Just or Jacob the Just, Jesus' brother, said, when they're dealing with the issue of circumcision. James the Just, the brother of our Lord, says, the people can go to the synagogue and listen to the Torah being read, which means that they went through the Torah from start to finish within a year during the time of Jesus and the early 12 apostles. So this is important because he reintroduced the feast days to them. This shows what Jerusalem looked like during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. I'm going to go back and let you look at that. As you can see, that at the city at that time, the walled city was elongated. And there's this very famous and inspirational story about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem by assigning a different clan or group of people with a different section of the wall, and they built it in a miraculous short amount of time. Of course, the book of Nehemiah begins with Nehemiah hearing that the walls of Jerusalem had been destroyed. Jerusalem was in ruins. He was a cupbearer of the king, so he went before the king, and the king gave him permission to go and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He was a governor of Judea for a while, but then he had to return to Persia to fulfill his royal duties and obligations there. And he was sent back a few more times afterwards. So he was coming and going from Persia to Jerusalem. And there's a lot of opposition. It's just like today, where there's a lot of controversy and opposition about Jerusalem. So this is very interesting, is that one of the things they did under Ezra and Nehemiah is they rebuilt, and this is about, we also see this with Zechariah. I'm going to go back to this. With Zechariah and Haggai, these prophets where they're rebuilding the goal to rebuild the temple. And And of course, the temple, as originally built by Solomon, was a glorious building, but the Jewish people did not have the means to rebuild the temple on such a grand scale. And so this is what the temple looked like, according to a detailed description in the book of Ezra. I had this Bible here, and it's like, they call it Zerubbabel's temple, because Zerubbabel was the one described in Zechariah. He's the governor who was endeavoring to rebuild the temple. First the altar, then rebuild the foundations, then build the temple itself. And just like rebuilding the walls, rebuilding the temple was a long, drawn-out affair. And first they had opposition. They commanded to stop building it because the Samaritans and the Canaanites trying to keep them from restoring the temple. Later they got permission. It was finally rebuilt. Zerubbabel played an instrumental role in rebuilding the temple, so this is called Zerubbabel's temple. The first temple was built by Solomon, which is sometimes called Solomon's temple, even though it's the temple of Yahweh, built by Solomon. And then we have the temple of Zerubbabel, which is actually the temple of Yahweh built by Zerubbabel. And this is very strange that, of course, at the time of Jesus, this building looked totally different because it was leveled. It was demolished and rebuilt. An entirely different building was built in its place by Herod. So you have Solomon's temple, Zerubbabel's temple, and then Herod's temple. And Herod's temple was destroyed, and the temple has yet to be rebuilt. But the Jewish people consider Zerubbabel's temple and we have Solomon's temple was destroyed. Zerubbabel builds the temple. This will be a very good teaching for you. So now I'm recording again. Let's go to the beginning. The high holy days in Hebrew is called Moedim. The Moedim. The high holy days. What are the high holy days? It begins with Yom Teruah, the blowing of the shofar, which is a call to repentance, right? Because what's next? Just a week later, you have Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where the only time of the year the high priest is going to the Holy of Holies and anoint the mercy seat with the blood offerings. Of course, first to atone for his own sins, and then to sin for the sins of the nation. First, he sacrificed a bull. Then he for his own sins. Then he sacrifices the goat. There's two goats, right? One's the scapegoat that's released in the wilderness. The other is the sacrificial goat. Its blood's put on the mercy seat. It's very interesting, and I'll talk about this a little bit. The Lamb of God, of course, for Passover, it could have been a kid goat or a lamb. Either one was acceptable offering or sacrifice. But in a way, the Passover lamb epitomizes what Jesus is. Of course, he's symbolized by the scapegoat, right? Because our sins are imputed upon Yeshua, and he carries them away. But also, his blood was a sacrifice that covers our sins. So he's also, all these sacrifices are symbols of Yeshua, right? So let's continue on. The high holy days, the Moedim, that's what you call it in Hebrew. And we see there's a high priest with his the breastplate with the gems. What I want to mention in the back is Ezra, around 480 or so BC. The Jewish people were in exile for 70 years. He comes back, and Ezra, they had lost the Torah. So Ezra found the Torah, brought it back. He built a pulpit, and he read the Torah to the people. And it also mentions that he had translators to make sure everybody had understanding, because most people still spoke Hebrew, but some people only spoke Aramaic. So he wanted to make sure everybody had understanding. And the Bible specifically says that the men and the women, this wasn't just a male-only thing, Ezra wanted the women there to hear the instruction of the law, and children who had understanding. Of course, crying babies, that would have been disruptive. But he wanted men and women, boys and girls, everybody that was able to understand. That's what it says in the Scripture, to be taught in Torah. So we're going to go on, and this is significant. It kind of amazes me how archaeologists are able to do this. This is what Jerusalem looked like during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Of course, in the book of Nehemiah, we have the story of the wall, right? What happened? At the beginning of Nehemiah, he's in Persia. He's the king's wine taster, right? That's the most trusted position you could have. And some of his friends, relatives came back from Jerusalem. They said the city's in ruins. He was distressed. He was actually mournful. So he approached the king, and he was mournful. And the king says, "What's ailing you? Why are you upset?" And it says he immediately prayed to God, and then God said, and he said, God told him to say, I guess, why should I not be distressed when my graves, my ancestors, my city, my forefathers lies in ruins? And just like the story of Esther, Esther boldly approached the king without being summoned, right? She could have been executed on sight, but Xerxes loved her, and so they're ready. They have the swords ready. They're going to go out and kill Esther. How dare she come into the king's presence unsummoned? So the same thing with Nehemiah. I mean, for him to go to the king, it's like, how dare you? You don't bring your problems to the royal court. Who do you think you are? But the king softened, his heart was softened towards Nehemiah, and he allowed Nehemiah to go and oversee the reconstruction of Jerusalem. And he was governor for a while, but he was going back and forth. He was recalled back to Persia and came back to Judea a few times. Had a lot of opposition. We see the same thing today. It's a spiritual battle where you have the Muslims are trying to destroy the Jewish people, all this conflict. And I remember, I've said this before, but I was in Bethlehem, not Bethlehem. I haven't been to Bethlehem. I was in Galilee. It's nice up there. It's like, this is a nice little country. It's like, why is the whole world is just mad, just going crazy about Jerusalem and the Jewish people, the nation of Israel? It's because this is a spiritual issue, right? Because on the rational and normal, this whole situation would be solved a long time ago, but it's a spiritual conflict. That's why we have these wars. And we actually had the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War recently. And when I was in Cairo and in Damascus, I think they have Tahrir Square. I think it means Victory Square, the main square outside of the Egyptian Museum where King Tut's treasures were kept. I think they're moving. They have this new museum called the Gem, the Grand Egyptian Museum. That's where King Tut's going to be moved to. Just thinking, did we see his mummy this time? I saw the mummy of many. I probably saw the mummy of the Fair of the Exodus. I've been to Egypt several times, but anyway, they spin it as if, even though in the end they lost the Yom Kippur War, it is so devastating on Israel. Israel wasn't prepared for it. So many people died, and it was probably, if it wasn't for American intervention, they would have been destroyed. And then we were like diplomatically throwing Israel under the bus with Kissinger, but. Like I said, it's so bad. There's a Yom Kippur War. They still spin it in the Arab world to this very day as a victory. So Ezra and Nehemiah, then Haggai and Zechariah. One of the things they were going to do is rebuild the temple. This is the temple that was under Ezra and Nehemiah, Malachi. This was built. Mostly Haggai and Zechariah are about rebuilding the temple. A lot of opposition, just like the walls. The Canaanites didn't want the walls rebuilt, opposed, tried to assassinate Nehemiah, and they didn't want the temple rebuilt either. It's a big conflict. They call this Zerubbabel's temple. Now, Solomon's temple was a beautiful, grandiose building, but as you can see here, this is based on the description in Ezra. What they call this Zerubbabel's temple, because Zerubbabel was the Jewish governor who had it rebuilt according to the book of Zechariah. So this is a plain building, not as beautiful and elaborate or plated with gold the way Solomon's temple was, but this is the temple that was rebuilt after return from exile under Ezra and Nehemiah. And like I said, this is another big conflict just to rebuild that. And several books of the Bible are about the conflict of rebuilding the temple. But let's go back. I want to look at Solomon's temple and Herod's temple. Just really quick, this is the comment I was making when you came in. Solomon's temple, first you had the tabernacle. We're going to look at the tabernacle. Then you had Solomon's temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians. So under Ezra, Nehemiah, Zechariah, Haggai, they rebuild the temple. It's just a plain building. And then King Herod, he wanted to outdo Solomon. He said, I want to build a bigger temple, greater temple than either Solomon built. And he actually did it. This temple was demolished by Herod, and a totally new temple was rebuilt, which is called Herod's temple. So you have Solomon's temple, you have Zerubbabel's temple, and then you have Herod's temple. Really, it's the temple of Yahweh built by Solomon, the temple of Yahweh built by Zerubbabel, and the temple of Yahweh built by Herod. But the Jewish people considered Zerubbabel's temple and Herod's temple the same building, even though the entire structure of Zerubbabel's temple was leveled, totally demolished, and then another building was built in the same place by King Herod. Why do they consider that the same building? Could you guess? Because when Herod came to the priest and said, I'm going to rebuild the temple, He said, we're going to tear this one down. We're going to build a totally brand new, bigger building. They says, okay, we just don't want to interrupt the sacrifices as long as we can celebrate the feast days. So he built the temple around in such a way that it didn't interrupt any of the feasts or the offerings. And since the offerings and the sacrifice and all the rituals were being carried out, they consider it the same building. It's like so they talk about the first and second temple. So Zerubbabel's temple and Herod's temple are called the second temple. But I mean, from my point of view, I mean, if they're totally different buildings, they're different buildings, right? That'd be the first, second, and third temple. But they consider it the same building because like when the Babylonians destroyed Solomon's temple, you didn't have offerings or sacrifices until the temple was rebuilt. And right now, we don't have sacrifices because the Mosque of Omar is on the Temple Mount. So let's continue. So we're going to go back to the tabernacle. This is a reproduction of the tabernacle here in the United States, built according to the specifications in the Bible. I think this is very interesting. I found this painting, and the Bible describes the Hebrews, or the different tribes of Israel, where they're supposed to camp out, where they're supposed to set up camp. So you look at this painting, and it's interesting that the camp settled when they made camp, it's the shape of a cross, right? So if you're a bird's eye view, you look down the Israelites and the tabernacle and all the campgrounds, it's the sign of the cross. I think that's not by coincidence. So as scholars look at that, it's like, okay, Zebulun's over here, Asher's here, and Benjamin's here, Judah's here, and you look at the census to see how big the tribes were. That's why the bottom is elongated, because Judah's on that side, and Judah's a larger tribe. So if you figure it out, it made the shape of a cross. Now this is the same. This next picture shows how they were oriented. Gad, Simeon, Reuben, Dan. Oops, it's too quick. Let's go back so you can see it. Zebulun. It's like, no, you're not going to look at that. Come on. Give me a hard time. All right. So you have Gad, Simeon, Reuben, Benjamin, Manasseh, Ephraim, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, and Judah. And you can see there Judah's the larger tribe, so that's why it's elongated on that side. So they have these people looking down on it from a mountain. I think that's a fascinating illustration. Yom Kippur, this is the high priest. This is an important theme I want to mention, is that we have I want to go back and look at that. We have the vestments that the high priest wore, right? The gold plate, the purple. Purple is very elaborate, expensive, a royal cloth. I mean, they had to, I think they used like snails to get the juice to make the purple dye. When you approach the Lord for the atonement, the high priest stripped off his royal robes and approached the Lord at Yahweh in plain linen garments in humility. I mean, the Lord told them to wear all those vestments as high priest, but when he did the atonement, he had to lay aside the ornate garments and approach Yahweh in the Holy of Holies in simplicity and humility. So this is the Ark of the Covenant. I want to talk about this. This was the design that was used in the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie. You know, as a kid when that came out, it had a big impression on me. The man who designed this he's an artist, a French artist. He worked in England a lot. His name was James Tissot. And it's a beautiful design, but I don't think it's accurate. I have a whole teaching about what the Ark of the Covenant really looked like. And my dad's design, well, it might not be perfect. It's a theoretical reconstruction. It's a lot more accurate because now we know that the cherubim were like, had the body of a lion, the face of a man, the wings of an eagle. Scholars just agreed on that now. And with this one, he just did humanoid, angels with, men with or women, because it looks like they have long hair, with angelic wings. So the story of James Tissot was earlier in his career, he touched on certain religious themes, but he was a secular painter. I think he's a friend of Gauguin, some other French. He's a French artist. He's in the French artist circles, and he was famous for painting lifestyles. I guess in the mid 1800s, right? Lifestyles of the rich and famous, and he had a conversion. He just converted. He's living a worldly lifestyle, and he had a religious conversion, and he decided from now on, I'm just going to paint for the Lord. So he painted the life of Christ. And this is before cinema, so he did 365 paintings of the life of Yeshua from, he went to Israel. He wanted everybody to look Jewish, and he wanted all the landscapes to be accurate. So he actually went, he did research. Of course, a lot of research he did is outdated. But for his time, he took this as a very serious endeavor. He wanted to be as accurate to how people looked, to the terrain of the Holy Land. He wanted to be as authentic as possible. So he traveled showing this big show. It would have been the equivalent of the Passion of the Christ. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Mel Gibson consulted Tissot's paintings. He returned to his, even though he's had the spiritual conversion, gave his life to the Lord, he's brought up as a Catholic, so he's doing a lot of work in the Catholic Church, so Mel Gibson's Catholic too. So what happened is, this is kind of unfortunate. So, big success, James Tissot's Life of Christ. Then he says, now I've done the Gospels, I want to go do the Old Testament. I'm going to paint the Bible from Genesis all the way to the book of Malachi. So he is halfway through, and I guess he inherited his father's a ranch in France somewhere, some farmland, and he was inspecting the property out in the cold and rain. He got pneumonia and died halfway through. And his assistants had, I grew up on these paintings. I had this little children's story Bible that had Tissot's paintings, and I could kind of tell as a kid, it's like, wow, these paintings are so amazing. And then I was looking at these other paintings, I was like, what? That doesn't even look like, it kind of looked like what he painted, but it's all off. So his students weren't as good an artists as he was. So the later paintings didn't have, they finished up, didn't have the quality of like I said, he only got halfway through the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, before he died. But this design he did for the Ark of the Covenant was immortalized in the Indiana Jones movie. One thing I think is incorrect. I think it's pretty obvious that the beam for carrying the poles for carrying the Ark were on the bottom, not on the side or the middle. But he's an artist. It's a beautiful design. I'll give him that. And based on what he known, the level or where biblical scholarship was, that was the best they could do at that time. So we'll look at some more of his paintings about the Ark of the Covenant. This is the centerpiece, right? The centerpiece. He painted this himself. This wasn't done by his students. That was the Ark of the Covenant being carried through the Jordan River. This is going around the walls of Jericho. And there's Dad in the Ark we have here. But, of course, the Ark of the Covenant is the centerpiece of the tabernacle and also the Holy of Holies. It represents the throne of God. That's what the Ark of the Covenant is symbolic of. Some people believe that and I think this is very likely too, that the cherubim may have formed a seat somehow. The way their wings were angled, it actually looked like a seat. But like I said, this is a good approximation that my dad did, and it's more accurate than Tissot's. I'm not, I really admire Tissot's work as an artist, but we have more knowledge and we're able to be more accurate now. Of course, you can see this right here, and there's Jeannie's projector. This is in Israel. If you go to the Negev in southern part of Israel, they have a reproduction of the tabernacle. They actually I guess they have electricity. You can see the power outlet right here. But this is really nice. So in Timnah, the Israelites would have gone through Timnah. In Timnah, they think it's the location of King Solomon's mines. They made a movie. What was it? Alan Quartermain and King Solomon's mines. It's like the idea. It's kind of like a prototype of Indiana Jones. I think the story was written around 1900. Alan Quartermain searching for King Solomon's mines, but they think that King Solomon's mines were in Timnah, or his copper mines, and they found a tabernacle in Timnah, the fragments of a tabernacle, and they found a bronze serpent there as well. So that's probably why the government of Israel, whoever these people were, decided, it's like, well, we found a tabernacle, there are remains of a tabernacle here. This is King Solomon's mines. The tabernacle was probably erected here. Why don't we make a reproduction of it? Which they did. So if you're in southern Israel, you can check this out. I have seen full-size replicas. The Seventh-day Adventist Church had one in Conroe over 10 years ago that I was able to see. They had another one, but it wasn't complete. The one at the Seventh-day Adventist had everything in it. The other one is like, things are like halfway done. But it's educational. It's important to. All right, this is you enter the how do you approach the Lord? Well, we have to have the sacrificial lamb, right? So the first thing, once you enter into you have a curtain, a fence curtain. The first thing that you're going to see is the altar of sacrifice, right? This is true for us as well. Yeshua is the sacrifice, and then we have to be baptized. Behind the altar of sacrifice, they have the brass laver, they called it, which is it's like a little baptismal pool. It doesn't describe. We know it was a big pool of water. We don't know how big it was, so scholars aren't really sure because the Bible doesn't go into detail like it does. It doesn't make good reading, or it doesn't make engaging, exciting reading. It's an instruction manual, but it's important. The detail, the description of the tabernacle and the furnishings are so detailed that we can recreate it like we see here in this picture. So there's the high priest wearing his royal vestments. This shows, there's the altar of sacrifice, and then we have the baptismal pool. This is a painting of, back too far. This is a painting of Moses ordaining his brother Aaron as the high priest. You can see Mount Sinai in the background. I went to the traditional Mount Sinai with my brother. Okay, this is a cutout view of the tabernacle. And so you go in the tabernacle. On your right hand is the table of shewbread, the bread of the presence. Who is Yeshua? He's the bread of life, right? So you have bread and wine there. That's very powerful symbolism for us, right? And then we have the menorah. We're trying to rebuild that. And then there's the altar of incense. According to the book of Revelation, the incense represents the prayer of the saints. You have the veil, and then the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the throne of God. I want to mention that there's a lot of symbolism of the Garden of Eden in the tabernacle. You have the symbolism of the cherubim. Women helped make the tabernacle. It specifically says that they did the embroidery, and they embroidered cherubim, as you see here, into the curtains. And so bread is, it's from the grain, it's from the produce of the earth. We have the Garden of Eden. Here you have the fruit of the earth. And then we have the menorah, reminds us of a tree, perhaps the tree of life. It's got branches. It had the petals, the blossoms, the fruit, and the patterns we see what my father was doing. And then we also see cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant. So a lot of it evokes the Garden of Eden. And what happened in the Garden of Eden? We had perfect fellowship with the Lord, with Yahweh, right? And then sin entered, and that was broke. So when you go into the tabernacle, it's kind of like a restoration, in a sense, of the relationship that mankind enjoyed before the fall. So this is the table of shewbread, and people don't really think about it. It's not very glamorous. This was also in the Arch of Titus. It's pretty simple. This is a good picture where we see. I wish it had the table of shewbread behind the high priest, but it got cut off in this picture. I need to see if I can find another painting. So there you see behind the high priest, he's got the incense in his. They would use that little urn of incense. Behind him is the table of shewbread. He's looking at the menorah, and then we have the altar of incense. Of course, the curtain is usually down, but behind the curtain is the Ark of the Covenant. So. All right, I like this painting because, of course, you and I know because we're working on it. But the menorah is a lamp stand, right? And on the top of each of the branches, the stands, you have lamps, like Aladdin's lamp, little oil lamps. And as we're seeing, and we're going to be able to do this, kind of modify what my dad did. They think they were on a swivel or pivot. It'd spin around. But the high priest, they would trim the oil lamps. So it's a lamp stand. It's not a candlestick because we're not using candles. I don't think that, I'm not sure when they invented candles as we know them, with the idea with the string in the middle. They were not widely used in Bible times. They might have had some people that used those, but they didn't really, I'd have to look and see historically when I think that the Egyptians would go to parties and they would put, they didn't have a wick or anything. They would put these little wax things they'd melt during the party. I guess they had fragrances in them. So there's pictures of them, putting these little. Those were that had a different function, right? but they didn't use candlesticks till, I don't think candlesticks really caught on big until late antiquity, even the Middle Ages. So at this time they're using lamps, oil lamps. So this is the Arch of Titus menorah, not the best picture. We've seen better pictures, but there they are carrying it. This is a drawing, and you can see, my father referenced things like this. There it is. It's on the floor over there. I went and talked to them in person, so hopefully we're going to start seeing things happen. I've talked about this before. Oh, I saw this. Somebody, this is kind of funny. Marjorie Taylor Greene posted a happy Yom Kippur and Sukkot painting. She had like a meme or a GIF, and it had the Hanukkah menorah. He goes, well, that's not accurate. And I saw a was a Hag Sameach, happy Sukkot, and it also had a Hanukkah menorah. But like I said before, the tradition of lighting the menorah at the time of Yeshua was a Sukkot tradition. It's kind of died out now, but at the time of Yeshua, they would light giant, and we're going to look at it, they have giant menorahs they would light in the temple that supposedly would give light to the entire city of Jerusalem. But what happened is, if you read the book of Maccabees, the first Hanukkah was, the story is like, we were fighting this terrible war to liberate the temple. Because of the war, we weren't able to observe Sukkot. Let's have Sukkot now in December. And they did it. They did a belated Sukkot. And they said, this is second Sukkot. It's a Sukkot in Kislev, or Sukkot in December. So it's like, from now on, let's have two Sukkots. We're going to do one, as prescribed by the Torah, but we're going to do the second Sukkot to remember, the Hanukkah story, basically. So all the traditions from Sukkot were carried over into Hanukkah originally. But so somehow the Jewish people forgot about the menorah and Sukkot, but that tradition was maintained in Hanukkah. That's why Hanukkah has 8 days, because Sukkot has 8 days. And the book of Maccabees clearly talks about this. But anyway, the menorah's you see these creatures on the bottom of the menorah, and I think people dispute that, but I think that they were originally there. I think that they represented, when you went to light the menorah, you step on them, right? It's like the scripture says, the God of peace will crush Satan under your feet shortly. We shall tread on serpents and scorpions, right? Most of these are sea creatures. The sea represented evil and chaos. So the light of truth, prevails over darkness and chaos. And I think that's the symbolism going on there. But maybe the Romans might have taken the menorah and stuck it on a different base. But I think that's. And Stephen Fine, he's Jewish. He's the foremost menorah scholar in the world right now. And he thinks that the base is authentic too. But that's what it looks like on the Arch of Titus. And my father's like, I'm going to reproduce that exactly. No one's done it before. So this is interesting. I went to talk to these people about the menorah, and he didn't understand it. They're telling us menorah. It's like, how is this a menorah? Look at this plate. So I showed him the picture, and it's like, oh no, can I have it? Can I get a copy of that? I said, sure. This is what I'm doing. Yes. And I said, this is significant. This is going to be the only authentic 3D model of the menorah on Earth. It's going to be the same size and proportions, the original one, based on archaeological evidence and the description of the scriptures. So it's like, this is really a significant thing that you're being involved in. So this is a beautiful painting, but I think there's two things wrong with it. They have like a little step ladder they push to the side of the menorah. You didn't need to have a step ladder pushed to it because it had a step ladder built onto it. That's what it looks like to me. But that's their tradition. I was talking to this guy. It's like, look at this. Look at the branches. My father told me, he's working on the menorah, he says, there's not an accurate model of the menorah on Earth. I said, come on, Dad. I look at there's menorahs all over the place. There's probably millions of menorahs. He says, look at them. They're not accurate. You're wrong, Dad. I'm going to look at the Temple Institute. They built solid gold. The Temple Institute. They're trying to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. They're already building all the furnishings for the temple. They rebuilt a solid gold menorah, and it's an accurate reproduction. I saw it. Hey, show me the picture. It's like, where are the blossoms and knobs? The Bible says they're on there. It's like the archaeological evidence, the Arch of Titus shows it's on there. It's like, what happens? I got this book. I think it's called the First Century Study Bible. I think the guy's Dobson. I think his father was like Bible teacher, and this is his son. He's trying to... The rabbis say this or that. Sometimes the rabbis have profound insight. A lot of times the rabbis are wrong. They're wrong. Which isn't surprising, We know more about the Bible now, today, because of innovations in linguistics. We understand the Hebrew language better now. You have the Ugaritic tablets they discovered in Rosh Hashanah to expand our knowledge. The language is very similar to Hebrew. It helps us understand Hebrew better. Or just linguistics itself helps us to understand. The archaeological record, not until the 1800s. If you get, I got 1611 King James Bible, and it shows a map of the Holy Land. It's all wrong because cartographers didn't go out there and survey it properly until the 1800s. So maybe the rabbis did the best they could do, and plus, they put a lot of trust in the tradition of the elders above the scriptures. And it's like, well, the elders said this is what the menorah looked like. Well, the Bible says it looked different. It's like they go and they listen to the elders and ignore the scripture. They were doing that in Jesus' day, right? We're going to go in the back in a few minutes. Now, this looks very inaccurate, right? Because all the branches are at an angle. But at least they have the knobs and blossoms on the top. And once again, it's like you didn't have to have a step ladder. It's built into it. So there's our menorah. This is very interesting. This is Solomon's temple. And in Solomon's temple, you had 10 menorahs and 10 tables of shewbread. And I think this is also from the Temple Institute. And here you have birds. That's the cherubim. The cherubim didn't look like that. They look more like what my father made. All right, this is Yeshua. This is in the book of Revelation. It's very interesting. The last time Yeshua appears in the book of Revelation, he's standing behind a menorah. That's how he manifests himself. Standing between, that's what it says, standing between 7 lampstands. What is this menorah? It's a lampstand. So that shows this is a New Testament. This is just Old Testament. This is how Yeshua, last appearance in the Bible, appears to John standing behind a menorah. That's in Scripture. Okay, this is a picture. I like this picture of the high priest dripping the blood on the mercy seat in the Ark of the Covenant. Notice the humble, plain robe. This is Solomon's temple. And, whoops. This thing's not cooperating with me. All right, what's significant about this is, okay, there's the altar of sacrifice. This is the brass sea. Remember we had the brass laver? Now they have a brass sea there. And you had 2 pillars at the front. This is probably an accurate model of what Solomon's temple looked like based on archaeological evidence. Because they found other temples, including temples of the Lord, in the region. They weren't supposed to build other temples of the Lord, but they did. And of course there's pagan temples that are similar to Solomon's temple. So that's why, based on the description of the Bible, this is a view of the high priest. This is also another accurate, the two brass pillars. And that was a feat to build those pillars. The Babylonians broke them apart. So this is the cutaway view. We see the menorahs. You see the menorahs right here. There's the high priest. This is the Ark of the Covenant. There are the cherubim. And there's the sea of the brass sea, the altar sacrifice. This is another based on the best archaeological evidence we have. I put this in there again, showing off. I think it's significant that there was not just one menorah this time. So there's the giant. They made another Ark of the Covenant, giant scale. This is an archaeological discovery showing what the concept of cherubim. This is interesting because
that looks more like the seat.
Yeah. Okay, what this is, it might have been something like this, right? But the Ark of the Covenant was here. So the Bible says Solomon built these massive cherubim. So he's like reproducing the lid of the Ark of the Covenant in a massive scale, right? And putting the Ark of the Covenant underneath it. So it says one wing is touching the wall, the other wing is touching the wall, and their wings meet in the middle. And so Richard Elliott Friedman, who's a Bible scholar, he did the measurements, and he said, he's arguing, he's probably correct. Probably what they did was they took Moses' tabernacle, maybe during the Feast of Tabernacles, they would take it, they would erect it, it would fit right under those wings. So it's possible that they would, during Tabernacles, they'd just put Moses' tabernacle together inside of Solomon's temple. And he lists a bunch of verses that talk about the tabernacle being kept in Solomon's temple. But I think that what probably would happen is they would take it apart and they would put it back together. They probably assembled it and disassembled it during Sukkot. That's just my theory, but there is biblical reasons for believing that. This is Ezekiel's temple. Hasn't been built yet, and this is another place in the Bible where you read it and it's hard to conceive unless you sit down and draw what's going on. And there's a lot of debate and discussion about this. So what happened is they destroyed the temple, and Ezekiel had a vision of a new temple and what it was going to be like, how they're supposed to build it. It's kind of interesting. It looks like there's a bunch of mini temples in there, and here's the great temple. So is this a vision? Is this the millennial age temple? Is this how the temple's going to be built at the time of Yeshua? Or is this just a spiritual thing? Or is this just how the temple should have been built by Zerubbabel? I mean, we don't really know. The interesting thing is it says there's like a spring of water that's coming out of there are massive caverns under the Temple Mount, and there's a lot of water under Jerusalem. But in Ezekiel, it describes this water just bubbling out of the temple, flowing out like a river, and just changing. You see it in this picture. You see the water flowing out, and actually, you see it in this picture too, revitalizing the land. So, Scott, the thing that bothers me, it doesn't bother me. I believe that when Yeshua died on the cross, that was the end of the animal sacrifices, my opinion. So Ezekiel describes animal sacrifices as taking place in this temple. So, I don't know. That maybe it's like, why would you have animal sacrifices? People say, well, maybe it's a form of worship. People can argue. I respect somebody else's opinion, right? So what I'm saying is, this is a vision that Ezekiel had. Some people think that in the millennial age, when Yeshua comes again, this temple will be built. So this is something to be taken very literal. Other people see it as the vision of how the temple should have been rebuilt by Zerubbabel, or it's an idealistic view of the temple. But anyway, it's fascinating to look at what it would have looked like if it was ever built.
Those three look like entryways, so it's not just only one way to enter. There's three different ways to enter.
This is a cutaway of Zerubbabel's. No, yes, it's Zerubbabel's temple. And like I said, there's all these scholars would come up with all these conjectural ways that Zerubbabel's temple looked, and there's a lot of difference of opinion. But then, I was just reading the scripture, and it's easy to overlook it, but it describes how the temple was supposed to be rebuilt by Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel, and Zechariah and Haggai. It actually describes in the Bible, but I read the Bible many times, and I just skipped over that passage for that slide. I saw this picture. It's like, how do they know that that's what Zerubbabel's temple looked like? Well, read Ezekiel. Read Ezra, this chapter, this verse. Like, okay, well, there it is. You're right. It's described what it looked like in the Bible. So this is during the time of Yeshua. You're coming down from Mount of Olives, and there's the Golden Gate, and that's what the temple looked like in the time of Yeshua. I want to take a pause because I think we need to go outside and read the Torah for the opening of Sukkot in the Sukkah. So there's this movie that came out. This is very interesting, and somebody had this vision. It's like, I want to make a movie. I want to make a movie about the destruction of Jerusalem, right? Jewish war, and so this guy couldn't get the money for a live action movie, so he hired an artist and he painted 1,500 paintings and did it as a actually Jack Chick did the same thing with a movie he made out of paint. Well, the first person to do that was what's his name, the guy he did the Civil War on PBS 20 years ago. His name is escaping me. It doesn't matter. But what he did is, instead of going out and filming, he took like photographs of Civil War, and so he told the story with one photograph after another. So this artist painted 1,500 paintings according to the movie script, and the actors are speaking this dramatic presentation. This movie is called The Legend of Destruction. It's got Oscar Isaac. He played Joseph in the Nativity Story. He's played in Marvel movies. He's a very successful actor now. But all these are people laying down. This is during Yom Kippur, and all those people are laying down, facing the Holy of Holies while the priest is performing the sacrifices. So we'll talk about Yom Kippur when we do a pause. Okay, so what's going on here? There you have the high priest. His back is to us. There's the two goats. They're going to cast lots. Before he does that, he has to sacrifice. I should have put these pictures differently. He has to sacrifice the bull, right, for his own sin. Then he sacrifices he chooses the sacrificial goat, right? They cast lots. One goat is for sacrifice. The other is the scapegoat. And there's a picture of it. He's cast a lot. Which one's going to be for sacrifice? Which is going to be a scapegoat? Now, this painting shows all these a type of a harness thing, because that's all they're doing in the temple, around all day long they're doing sacrifices. So here is the high priest carrying the goat, the sacrificial goat for the sacrifice. There's the altar sacrifice. And this is a painting of what the temple looked like during the time of Yeshua. This is a model. Some people have been disputing this recently, but this is based on serious archaeological work, what the temple looked like. And it's like, how do people know the temple looked like this after 2,000 years? And there's another diagram showing Herod's temple. I want to show you one thing before we go there. So this is the base art. The temple facade looks this. Okay, maybe I can read this to you. So here's the gate to the temple, all right? The door to go inside. And there's these beams, and they have garlands and grapes. It doesn't describe it. But it's in the painting, though. What they would do is people would give offerings of gold, and they would take the gold and they would sculpt garlands. I was telling you about that the other day. They'd hang the golden grapes and leaves all around the door. And I guess the more gold that they gave, the more you get more and more grapes and garlands in the front. So this is based on Josephus, the Mishnah, and archaeological surveys. So let's continue. All right, this is Bar Kokhba's coin. Okay, we're looking at the facade of the temple. I'm going to take a break. This is Bar Kokhba's coin. And this is around 130 or so AD, and he claimed to be the Messiah. Bar Kokhba in Aramaic means the son of the star. That's how the Messiah is described in the prophecies of Balaam in the book of Numbers. The star will come, the Messiah. So Bar Kokhba, I am that Messiah. Of course, he led a revolt. Apparently, he talks about he's persecuting people called the Galileans, which are probably Christians, because he's claiming Jesus is the Messiah. I am the Messiah. And eventually he's defeated by the Romans and put to death. The famous Rabbi Akiva was his false prophet. So you had an Antichrist figure in Bar Kokhba and a false prophet figure in Rabbi Akiva, who hailed this false prophet, this false Messiah. He's a false prophet hailing a false Messiah. So anyway, Bar Kokhba, he believed he was serving. He's wrong, right? He probably believed in his mind that he's the Messiah and he's going to do everything according to the law of God. So he minted these coins and he put what the temple looked like on the front of his coins, right? So that's a depiction of Herod's temple right there. And this coin was minted when images might have been preserved, or the historical memory would have, probably still people alive who remember what the temple looked like. And of course, their goal was to rebuild it as it was, but he was never able to do that because the Romans eventually defeated him. This is the niche. Well, go back. This is in the Dura Europos synagogue. This is the oldest synagogue in the world. I was there. It was in eastern Syria. Now it's in the Damascus Museum. And this is where they probably kept the Torah scroll and where the rabbi would have preached from. So you see this painting above the ark, where the ark would have been. The ark is what they call a box that holds the Torah, right? So here we see the menorah, and even back then they have the knobs on it, right? Rabbis can't get it. They knew that it had that because the Bible says it had the, as Dad did it. Now they can't get it right, but at least that's just kind of a crude picture. But they knew it had the blossoms and knobs on it and the fruit, right? Now the rabbis, oh, it didn't look like that. Well, this is from about the year 200 AD, probably based on older traditions and images. So this is probably around 100 years or less from the temple was destroyed. And notice the temple looks pretty much the same way it looked on Bar Kokhba's coin, right? This is a painting of Herod's temple. It's so ancient they probably had other paintings, or they remembered what it looked like, right? So, and that's why when we see these Herod's temple, that's why it looks like that, because that's how Bar Kokhba depicted it, and that's the painting of it right there. So it's not a lot of conjecture. What did the temple look like? We have two images from ancient times showing what it looked like. So there's a painting of the temple. So this is significant. So this is also a Feast of Trumpets thing. So they found a stone with an inscription probably around this corner, and it said, "This is the place of blowing the shofar." So there's the inscription they found, and so this guy did a painting, a drawing of where it was and what it looked like, blowing the shofar. Yeah, it actually looks like it's got a silver trumpet. So this is the back of the temple. Like I said, this is where they're blowing the shofar. That's I think that description says Corbin. But anyway,
what does the inscription say? What was that?
Corbin, which means holy. But they found the inscription. It's a different inscription. I wish I had a picture of it, but this is a recreation of what it would have looked like. So there's this place where they would go. They found this inscription, this rock outside the Temple Mount. So this priest, is blowing the shofar at this little platform, or kind of carved in stone from which to blow the shofar. So this is basically, and the Hebrew scripture says, blow the shofar from here. Why would they blow the shofar? Different, for Yom Teruah, just for different, to denounce the Sabbath, denounce the various. So this is the back of the temple. That's where they found that inscription. The temple is facing to the east. And that's a different inscription. There's the model. I'd like to see that. This model. I'll go back to this model in it used to be in the King David or the Holy Land Hotel or something like that, and it's a massive model. It's like 30 feet wide across, and what they've done is based on the best archaeological information they have. They reconstructed what Jerusalem looked like at the time of Yeshua and the apostles, and it's pretty close. It's kind of amazing, especially the Temple Mount. So I have to touch on this. Sometimes people present sensational theories that are not correct. So there's an area, I walked around Jerusalem, and there's the area called the City of David. And so people say, no, the Temple Mount's not really the Temple Mount. It's a Roman fortress. And the Temple Mount was over the City of David. But this is impossible. This does not fit the biblical description, because they preach from the temple. The Temple Mount. Let's go back. Let's look at this. The population. This was a major site of pilgrimage. Just like today, I don't know why this thing isn't not cooperating. Just like today, I think there are more Jews in New York City than there are in the entire state of Israel, right? The same thing was true back then. There were more Jews that lived outside of the Holy Land than lived in the Holy Land. And many of these people, it's not really feasible for everybody to go to every single feast. But okay, just take for example the Islamic religion, right? They have their temple, the Kaaba. Does every single Muslim go to the Kaaba during the Great Hajj? No. But a lot do. A lot go there. You're supposed to go one time in your life. And during the time of Muhammad, it's a pagan temple. They actually, this is crazy, but they have the black stone. The black stone used to be a carved statue of a sex goddess, and it's kind of perverted. But they actually have this silver receptacle. You stick your head in it, and you're supposed to kiss the black stone. And the other thing is, it was common for a pagan temple to have a stone like that. All the pagan temples. So they kept it, and it wasn't just, a lot of times they're just strange looking rocks. But according to John in Damascus, this is a carved idol. They broke it apart, so you can't tell, What happened is another Arabian tribe went to Mecca and stole the black stone, and they held it for a while. It was ransomed back, but they broke it to pieces, so you can't see that it was a carved statue at one time. Be that as it may, that's not the point. The point is the Islamic temple, which is it's an ancient pagan Arabian temple. Islam came around. No, this isn't a pagan temple anymore. Well, they admit it. They admit that in Islam, they admit this is a pagan temple. It has 365 idols in it. Muhammad threw out all the idols except for the black stone, which is an idol too. He kept that one. But okay, you go to Mecca today, they have to have a big courtyard. Why? To accommodate all the pilgrims. So I don't know the exact number. This is an approximation. It's like the population of Jerusalem is like 20 to 50,000. But scholars estimate that during the feasts, it was 250,000 people that would come to Jerusalem to observe the feast days. So first the Maccabees, then King Herod expanded the courts of the temple to accommodate the masses, right? So when somebody has, all this scholarship, the scholars who came up with this, they're just going where the evidence leads. The best archaeology, these are very highly trained specialists. And on top of that, a lot of these scholars who came up with this reconstruction, and we saw they're using archaeological evidence, they're believers. These aren't like, there are some, was it Finkelstein in Israel? It's like, he's like a villain. Wahahaha, I'm an archaeologist. I'm going to prove the Bible's not true. Wahaha. There are that type of archaeologists out there. I'm not denying that. But the scholars that came up with this is based on serious research, the archaeological evidence, the biblical evidence, the mission of Josephus, and this is a sincere effort. This isn't people with some kind of weird agenda. These are very serious scholars that came up with this, and it's based on the best evidence. So somebody comes up with it. No, the scholars have it wrong. It's like okay, look at that. It's like there's no room for the money changers. Where would Jesus preach in the temple? How did tens of thousands of people get in that little area? This doesn't make any sense. And there's something else. I'm going to look at this. It's like Jesus said, okay, the Bible says, let's look at this here. The Gospel of Mark. Jesus cleanses the temple. And people would come into the front, to the front gate, and they go around, and they go out the back here to the marketplace. It's like, I don't want to go around the temple. Let's just take a shortcut to the temple and go to the marketplace. Jesus says, this is not a thoroughfare. This is not this is holy ground. This is a place for worship. You need to go around. Don't take your wares to the market here. Maybe they should have built a tunnel underneath it. I don't know if they could do that with all those big, giant caverns in it. But Jesus said, they're disrupting worship. It's not appropriate for people to be carrying their goods to the marketplace. So that's the Gospel of Mark. So if you look at this, why would people go to the temple to carry goods to the marketplace? Yeah. This is wrong. It's wrong. So what happened is there's Fortress Antonia. This is where they get this from. So the Romans had a fortress for a quick reaction force in case there is trouble in the temple, and it happened. Right? So we can see it here. Paul's in the temple. Right? He's worshiping. He's walking around there. He's minding his own business. And Fortress Antonia was kind of a lookout tower. They could see what's going on there. So Paul is falsely accused of bringing Gentiles to the temple. And there's a riot. So the Romans go out there and they arrest Paul and they quell the riot. So that's it's a quick reaction force. But this guy who comes up with this idea, it just doesn't make any sense. How could you have a riot in a small area? And then I don't even know what this is down here. What is this supposed to be? This is what bothers me about this is that they start convincing. I wrote this book. One of my books I wrote it's called Christ the Man, and it's about Jesus in the temple. And I did all this research. And then it's like, oh, the Temple Mount's not the Temple Mount. What do you mean it's not the Temple Mount? Oh, it's Fortress Antonia. It's like, what? Now look at this. It's like, this is impossible. But they get good people to get hoodwinked in this stuff. why does this go on? Why do people come up with this? People want to rebuild the temple. And there's a mosque there right now. So it's like, okay, we can't build the temple with a mosque there. Maybe we build it a little bit over here, a little bit over there. But it doesn't matter because the Muslims aren't going to allow you to build a temple close to the Temple Mount. You think they're going to let the Jews build a mosque next? Not now. It's not going to happen, you know. So let's look at this. This is based on the archaeological. It's Rittmeyer. He's a professional architect. So here's another thing. So the Romans threw down these massive stones to the temple to show, we destroyed the temple. Look at these big stones, to show their might, their power, to show their humiliation of the Jewish people. So 2,000 years later, those massive stones to the temple are still there. The Romans left it there as a testament of their power and how they destroyed the temple, right? They're still there. Look how big those. Do you think that the Romans moved those like several hundred feet to fool us? That's the remains of the temple. They're still there where they were thrown down at the time of Yeshua. Let's continue. There's another example. Here's I guess you can look at this little. So that shows you how big these rocks are. All right. This is very significant. In Jerusalem, you have the Mosque of Omar, the Dome of the Rock, right? So there's a rock there at the Dome of the Rock. That's why they call it the Dome of the Rock, right? It's the Mosque of Omar. And you look at the rock, and the Bible says that Abraham was sent by God to sacrifice Isaac at a place that God would show him, Mount Moriah. And it is believed that Mount Moriah is the Temple Mount. So this would have been the place where Abraham sacrificed his son. Now, according to the Bible, is Ishmael. Of course, Ishmael, that God halts the sacrifice, right? It's a test of faith. But it's also prophetically symbolic. Yahweh calls Abraham, sacrifice your only son. Technically, that wasn't his only son, right? He had Ishmael. Why was God using this language? It was at that time his only son because Ishmael, in a way, was exiled. It's gone as far as Abraham knew. Because this is a prophetic symbolism of, where's the lamb that's going to be sacrificed? God himself will supply a lamb. The only son, the son of promise, the son of the covenant being sacrificed, this is all prophetically symbolic of Yeshua, right? So, the Muslim tradition, you can see a whole bunch of prayer rugs around. The Muslim tradition is that Ishmael, now the Quran doesn't say it's Ishmael, but that's Muslim tradition. Some Muslim theologians say no, it was Isaac, but the preponderance view is that it was Ishmael, right? Most Muslim theologians. Even though some theologians see it was Isaac, the majority opinion of Muslim scholars it was Ishmael that was sacrificed here, right? So this is where they say Ishmael was sacrificed. The interesting thing is that there is an arc-shaped kind of a platform indented into the rock. It's the proportions of the Ark of the Covenant. And it's also with the right orientation. If you look over here, it's like, what's going on over there? This is kind of interesting. Is that when the Crusaders took Jerusalem, they quarried stones to sell in Europe. It's like, how would you like that? This is a sacred relic. This is a stone from the Holy of Holies. So they're quarrying that so they could sell stones for the temple in Europe. So they're actually damaging it, right? Thankfully, they didn't get to where the ark rested at. Maybe that's divine providence. But that's very significant that this, we'll look at that. So the purple there, the purple is the Mosque of Omar. Notice this at a little bit of an angle. Why? Probably because it's facing Mecca, right? While the temple itself is facing straight to the east. And the interesting thing is, this is the Mosque of Omar, this is what Herod's temple would have been based on archaeological evidence. And that smoothed out platform is right dead center where the Ark of the Covenant, and people just didn't even think about it until recently. It's like, people didn't even notice it. It's been there for, probably.
There are no coincidences.
Right. Notice how it lines up. That's because the Ark of the Covenant was lost after the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple. the ark was lost, but apparently, I don't have this in there. But when I was in Egypt, there's an Egyptologist, Bible scholar, kind of a missionary too, named Steve Wondrink. He's written some books. Steve Wondrink. Very hospitable. I was able to meet him and talk to him. And he thinks that there was a stone. This is kind of made sense. They carved that out and then they put a stone on top of it. He thinks that the cornerstone is not cornerstone. He says it's a cornered stone on which they probably carved that indentation. They indented that area in there and then they put the stone, the cornerstone over that. It didn't have to be that high, but it was a platform in which the ark. Anyway, that's the platform. However this worked out, that's the platform, I believe, that the ark, and this has just been revealed recently by Rick Meyer and other people who've been surveying the Temple Mount. So you can see there's even under Herod's temple, they had the laver, right? You had the ramp, you had the altar. And the purple is the Muslim mosque. And when I went to Israel, I went to the Wailing Wall, but I didn't go to the Temple Mount at that time. I think it's open to the public, though. You have to be respectful of Muslim tradition and courtesy, but it's open to the public. As long as they're not praying, right? So, shows the emplacement of the Ark of the Covenant. So the blue here, the yellow is the rock and the Dome of the Rock, right? And I guess this is what the Muslims have built around it. The blue here is what would have been the wall of Solomon's temple. And then there's the emplacement of the Ark of the Covenant. That's Solomon's temple. Rectangular depression, that's it. That rectangular depression is where the ark rested. You see it? This is like a drawing of it. This is a photograph. You can see the rectangular depression, and those lines here. Would have been Solomon Temple. So, the walls of Solomon's temple. You can see this is dead center where the ark. If all the it all lines up with the measurements, right? Herod's temple, Solomon's temple. That is dead center, and also the correct proportions. It's like like you said, what's the coincidence of a carved indenture and indented into stone? Somebody, the measurements. I mean, this has been in Muslim possession. Do you think the Muslims went in there and carved the exact? Why would they have done that? How would they have known? Nobody knew until modern archaeologists looked at it.
You know what? We were there first, so But on the positive side, they've been protecting it, so that's good. So that's a good thing.
They didn't even notice it, right? Nobody really thought about it until recently. And then archaeologists looking at it, like, what is that? That's that's the shape of the ark. Okay, let's do an overlay. That's dead center, where based on our archaeological surveys.
No matter what, bottom line, it's a holy place.
All right, this is Melchizedek. Melchizedek. There's little problems here. There's Melchizedek. Who is Melchizedek? We talked about this in Sabbath. Melchizedek is the priest king of Salem, which is Jerusalem. His name means the king of righteousness. After Abraham goes to war, defeats the kings, liberates his, they've taken his nephew, Lot, captive. Lot is important because he's the ancestor of King David, the matriarchal or maternal side, right? Through Ruth. Ruth the Moabitess. So Lot is the forefather of Yeshua, in a sense, right? Through the maternal line. So Lot is taken captive as a prisoner of war. Abraham finds out about it. Abraham's just minding his own business, doing his own thing. It's like, these invading kings came and they destroyed Sodom and took all this, and they took your nephew too. So it's like, I called his Amorite allies, Mamre and others. This before the Amorites had become, there's still some good Amorites at the time, I guess. And he went and liberated Lot. So he comes back from this great victory, and he gives a tithe to King Melchizedek, who's a priest king of El Elyon, or God Most High. And he worships with Abraham with bread and wine. So the book of Hebrews says that Melchizedek, what does his name mean? It means Melchizedek, the king of righteousness. He's a priest king. He's a type of Yeshua. He's a type of Jesus, right? That's what the book of Hebrews explores who Melchizedek is. So that's a mosaic of Melchizedek. Jesus Christ, our great high priest. Had another image in there. Editing errors. All right, there's the dad's Passover lamb, the sacrifice. There's another picture of Passover lamb. My dad's looks a lot better than that, doesn't it? So there's the high priest. Now, the book of Hebrews talks about this. Jesus, Yeshua, he's the royal Messiah. He's the son of the royal line. He's a descendant from King David, as I mentioned, right? King David was the tribe of Judah, but David's grandmother, Ruth, was a Moabitess. So, you have two types of priests. You have the Levites, which are lesser priests, and you have the Kohanim, which are the high priest, the high priestly clan. And like I was mentioning, you can tell that in Jewish names today, if somebody's Levi or Levin, he's probably a Levite. If somebody has the last name of Cohen, they're probably the descendant of the priest, of Aaron or Zadok. So this is the high priest wearing his robes. So you have the 12 tribes. One of the 12 tribes is Levi. And then you have the family of Aaron. You have to be a priest, you have to be of Levi. To be a high priest, you have to be the family of Aaron. So that's the Jewish high priesthood. But Melchizedek is a contemporary of Abraham, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then finally Jacob has Levi. So this is a more primitive and more ancient priesthood, right? And then this is another picture of the high priest sprinkling the blood on the mercy seat. Notice he has the incense. This is a painting. I think I kind of like it. It shows people praying, and it shows the prayer as a mist coming up before, it's like incense going all the way up before Yeshua in heaven, and Yeshua is wearing the priestly garments as he. The book of Hebrews says he ever liveth to make intercession for us. When I look at Yom Kippur, I think that,
5th. October 5th.
That's from last year.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't find the picture without my writing on it, so I just, this will work. All right. Okay. Something got cut out of this thing. I'm going to fix it. Oh, there it is. Okay, what in the world? It skipped ahead, that's what happened. All right. This is a Greek Orthodox icon showing Jesus as the great high priest. And like Melchizedek, he looks like the holy hand grenade of Antioch, right? But that's bread in his hand, and the other's a chalice. So like Melchizedek brought bread and wine before Abraham, Yeshua brings, bread and wine in the Eucharist and the Lord's Supper. Priestly qualities of Yeshua, of Jesus. Which quality does the Bible confer to Jesus as a high priest? It says, for such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens. Jesus is merciful and faithful, according to Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17. Jesus was tempted in all points such as we are, yet without sin. Jesus has compassion on us because he understands our infirmities, because he was tempted in all ways such as we, yet without sin, right? So he can sympathize with us. He's not some kind of separate, He came down and condescended to man and suffered, the way we did. So then we have Jesus has compassion on us. Jesus is sovereign over us. Hebrews 3:6. Jesus intercedes on our behalf. All right. Joyce is really, it's okay, she's very enamored. She has her charts about the Melchizedek priesthood, but she goes to the Jewish tradition. Shem was the Melchizedek and passed on that line. What happened is there's a verse that mentions in Hebrews. I think it's from where it says, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." Well, what is this priest forever? So, what's going on is for the priest, for the Jewish people, the only person who could be a priest is a son of Levi. The only person who could be a high priest is a descendant of Aaron. So when you have the Melchizedek priesthood, this is something more ancient. And like I said, this is a deep subject. I can't get into it all right now. So there's a lot of, the book of Hebrews is all about Jesus being, Melchizedek is a type or symbol of who Jesus is. So that what Hebrews is saying is like Jesus is priest and king. So it's like, well, how is Jesus priest? Because David wasn't approved. Actually, David did do some priestly things. He went before the Ark of the Covenant. He wore an ephod. He danced before the Ark of the Covenant. So King David himself did some priestly functions. But later on, David's great-great-great-grandson, Uzziah, he tried that. He's like, I'm the king. I'm going to go into the Holy of Holies. I'm going to usurp the position. I'm going to become the high priest. You know what happened to Uzziah? He was stricken with leprosy because he's presumptuous. He's being presumptuous, right? I'm going to go. It's like, no, we have the priesthood. You're not the priest. You're the king. You're a God of the king. It's good that you're zealous for the law. But yeah, he was smitten with leprosy because only the high priest is supposed to, this king's just going to barge in there and go before the Ark of the Covenant. So this is a big issue. Who is the Melchizedek? So there's a lot of speculation. So what the Jewish people did later on to dismiss all these concerns, Melchizedek was Shem. Who's Shem? Shem is the ancestor of the Jewish people. This isn't some different priesthood. This is still in our family line, right? If they make Shem the Melchizedek priesthood, then it's still in their family line, right? Because Shem is the ancestor of Abraham. But if it's this king of Salem, a Canaanite king, right? He was in the land before Abraham got there. I mean, what is all this about? There's no evidence from the Bible that Melchizedek was Shem. And that's not the idea that the Jewish people had at the time of Yeshua. This is from one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is 11. Well, Cave 11, there's like, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how many caves there were, but there's 11 at least, right? I think Cave 4 and Cave 11 had a lot of scrolls in them. So this is from Cave 11. So if you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see 4Q or 11Q. That means there's those. So some caves only had a few fragments or just one scroll, right? A couple of these caves are just cram-packed full of scrolls. And one such cave was 11. So 11Q13, also known as 11Q Melech, or the Melchizedek document, is a fragmentary manuscript among the Dead Sea Scrolls from Cave 11, which mentions Melchizedek as the leader of God's angels in a war in heaven against the angels of darkness, instead of the more familiar Archangel Michael. This text is an apocalyptic commentary on the Jubilee year of Leviticus chapter 25. Of course, we read 23, which is about the feast of the Lord. There it is. That's and there's a quotation from it. It says, and that's the scroll we just saw, the Melchizedek scroll, right? The book of Melchizedek among the Dead Sea Scrolls. There it is, right? And let's look at this quotation here. And Elohim is Melchizedek, who will save them from the hand of Belial. As for, they went too fast. Then you shall send abroad the trumpet in all the land. So that's interesting. Of course, believing in the triunity of God, of Yahweh, they're saying that the Melchizedek is God. This sounds like what we believe about, according to the book of Hebrews, right? And then it's connected with the blowing of the shofar. So there's another book here. This is found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can look it up. This is not the Dead Sea Scroll. We just look at the Dead Sea Scroll. This is the Nag Hammadi Codices. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was the book of the Melchizedek, right, which we just saw. Now we have the Nag Hammadi Codices. They found the Gospel of Thomas among the Nag Hammadi Codices, and we're talking about that. The Epistle of Silas and the Gospel of Thomas, two very significant books found among the Nag Hammadi Codices. And unfortunately, the text of the Melchizedek, this is a different book about the Melchizedek, and we can see there's a lot of holes in this document, unfortunately. But this is interesting. Melchizedek is the first tractate from Codex 9 of the Nag Hammadi Codices. The text identifies Jesus Christ as the Melchizedek. Jesus is the Melchizedek's flesh and blood human who was born, ate, and drank, and suffered, and died. So Jesus is the Melchizedek. This is kind of interesting, where some of the Nag Hammadi Codices are Gnostic, or have Gnostic tendencies. And these are unorthodox beliefs, right? It's not conforming to New Testament doctrine. But this book is kind of a transition where it correctly identifies Yeshua as Jesus as the Melchizedek, but it also says, because the Gnostics, some of the Gnostics denied that Jesus was a. These are kind of strange ideas, but these are these are things that capture the imagination of the ancients. Plato had the allegory of the cave. Have you ever heard of the allegory of the cave? You heard of that, right? Where these people are chained down, and there's a fire behind them, and the only world they know is shadows on the wall of a cave. That's reality for them. And finally, one of these guys breaks free, and he goes out there, and he goes out of the cave, and the light's so bright, it takes a while for his eyes to adjust to it. Then he sees the real world. And he goes out and he enjoys life. But then he feels in his heart, like, oh, my poor friends are all chained in this cave, and all they know is I used to think that was reality. I want to go back, and I want to explain to them this is all an illusion. This isn't reality. We need to break free and see the world for what it really is. So he actually, the parallel didn't make total sense, but he tries to tell these people what reality is like. So they gouge his eyes out and they crucify him and kill him, because they're more comfortable with their false reality. They don't want to hear about the real world, So that's what Plato was saying. But Plato had some of his thinking was profane. Some of his thinking was profound. It's like Plato's he was a pervert too. I mean, he's like a homosexual pervert. There's some weird stuff in Plato, but sometimes Plato's right about things. Some people just love Plato, and it's like, ugh. Plato's kind of gross. It's disturbing. He believed in a totalitarian police state. But Plato thought, this is what they say in philosophy. You see that table? That's not a real table. That's just a crude example of what a table is. The concept, the idea in your mind of table. This is just a crude reflection or copy of that. The mental image of a table is a real table. This is just a crude illusion. That's what Plato. So the Gnostics took that even further, and so not only is this a crude reflection of the ideal of a table, it's bad. Only the idea in your mind is good. The spiritual world is good. The material world, they took it so far as to say that matter in and of itself is evil, and that a false God created matter, and only the world of ideas and the spiritual world is true and good and pure. So as a consequence of that, these people, if they believe Jesus was sinless, and they believe that matter was sinful, then Jesus could not have had a material body, right? So they believed that Jesus was a phantasm. So that's what they believed. Docetism is what they called it. And oddly enough, Docetism is taught in the Quran. It says Jesus wasn't really crucified, he only seemed to be crucified. Muhammad was quoting from Gnostic Gospels that were espousing this view. But this book, which is in a collection of Gnostic tractates, says that no, Jesus had a physical body. Of course, he's pure and holy, but he had a real physical body. He suffered, he ate and drank, he suffered, died, and he rose again. So this is very significant, these two books, one found among the Dead Sea Scrolls about Melchizedek, and one found among the Nag Hammadi codices. We're almost done here. I want to mention, of course, the Book of Enoch also mentions, Second Enoch also mentions the Melchizedek priesthood in it. And this is Second Enoch. And there's a section in Second Enoch which is called, the last section of the Book of Second Enoch, sometimes called the Exaltation of Melchizedek. And it went. I want to mention something I think is significant about the Book of Enoch really quick. Of course, the Book of Enoch was destroyed by the church, but archaeologists found the first section of the Book of Enoch in Greek. There's the 5 books of Enoch. This is just the first book of the 5 books of Enoch, so it's not the whole book, it's a fragment. But it was connected to the manuscript of the Paschal, the Passover sermon of Melito of Sardis. And Melito of Sardis is kind of like a Messianic Jewish Passover Haggadah. That's what this Paschal or Passover sermon is thought of. And it's interesting that this ancient Jewish Christian Passover Seder that dates to the year 150 was found on the same manuscript with the Book of Enoch. I think that's very curious. So anyway, the last section of Second Enoch. So the Book of Enoch is very ancient. It's hundreds of years before the time of Yeshua. But second Enoch, scholars think, was written around the time of Yeshua. So it outlines the priestly succession of Enoch. Enoch's son Methuselah is asked by the people to act as interim priest. The priesthood of Ner, the grandson of Methuselah, is also temporary. So this book is also examining the idea of the Melchizedek priesthood. Like I said, the last section of the book of Second Enoch is the exaltation of Melchizedek. Now these are paintings, I think this is by the Seventh-day Adventists, but I really like these paintings because it shows Yeshua in heaven before the heavenly Ark of the Covenant. And the book of Revelation seems to state that there is an Ark of the Covenant in heaven. So here we have Yeshua officiating as high priest in heaven, interceding for us. So there's this beautiful painting of Yeshua with the robes of the high priest, the great high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. This one, I guess you have living angels instead of the statue of angels. All right, so King of Saints, that's our church. There's one more section here, temple theology. This is very interesting. I have this book. I put this in the video. This is a book on the Book of Enoch called The Lost Prophet, the Book of Enoch, and Its Influence in Christianity by Margaret Barker. And I don't know if I agree with everything she says. She's a British theologian. I think she's almost 80 years old now. She's still living as far as I know. And some of her approach, I think, is right, where she looks at a lot of the apocryphal texts, a lot of the extra-biblical literature, kind of in the same avenue that Robert Farrell is doing. So she's written several books, The Lost Prophet, which I have here. Okay, temple theology. Let's watch the visual effects of that. Never mind. We're going to close up in like 5 minutes. Ready? There we go. Temple theology. Dun, dun, dun. Pause this thing. So here she is, Margaret Barker, the author of The Lost Prophet, the Book of Enoch. She's also author of the book of The Great High Priest, The Temple Roots of Christian Liturgy, Temple Theology, and King of the Jews. So I want to get some of her book. Someone has written a book. I have it in here. I have a copy of Melita of Sardis's Passover sermon, which is an ancient Messianic Jewish. There's a sect of Messianic Christians called the Quatrodecimans. So this is considered like their Passover, a Messianic Passover Seder. But the person who translated that wrote a book about early Jewish Christians keeping Passover called The Lamb's High Feast. I want to order that book. I haven't gotten it yet. And I'd like to get some of her books too. Like I said, I'm not saying I agree with everything she says. I don't, but I think she's got a very interesting perspective, and she's got a lot of good information. So according to Barker, the main ideas of temple theology are the following: understanding the first temple as the figure of the whole universe, the inner court, the sea, as the figure of the pagans, which I think that's true because water, like on the base of the menorah, represents chaos, right? It's the pagans, it's the lost. The holy, the earth, is the figure of the Jewish people, and the Holy of Holies, the heaven, to be a figure of the Garden of Eden. We talked about that, right? Symbolism of the Garden of Eden and the tabernacle and the temple. Entering the Holy of Holies is a mystical experience that transforms man into an angel, theosis, thus entering the Garden of Eden and giving knowledge to understand creation. This idea is related to the resurrection. The main aim of the liturgy, and particularly the Day of Atonement, was to maintain the creation. The Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel, was the Son of the Most High God. Jesus, from the very beginning, is recognized as the Lord of this sense. So, the early Christian liturgy incorporated many elements. The first temple liturgy, the liturgy of the bread, the Eucharist, traces its roots to the Saturday offering of bread, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 5 through 9, liturgy of the wine and the Day of Atonement. So, I don't know, she's got some very interesting insights. I like to read her. So there's the painting what Solomon's temple would look. Sorry, this is Herod's temple, not Solomon's temple. Priests were angels and angels were priests. Now, we're not angels, but Jesus says when we die, we become like the angels, right? We're going to be, our resurrected self and our spirits are angelic in a sense, but we're not technically angels. We're a different order of being, right? But priests serve an angelic form in a way. The royal high priest was the Lord of his people. Incarnation was symbolized by the vestments. Humans could become like angels. This is known as the resurrection of theosis. The temple was remembered as Eden. Adam was the original high priest, and leaving Eden was losing the temple. I think that's true. The New Testament verses the story of Eden and brings Christians back into the original temple. So this is me. This is kind of unfortunate. They had the Holy Land experience in Orlando, Florida. So I finally went there, and it started off as a Messianic Jewish center, and then TBN took over, and they kind of made it a little bit gaudy. You go in this mountain. You sit in bleachers, and they had a recreation of the rituals. You sit in the bleachers, you watch the high priest go to the altar, the laver, just go in, find the Ark of the Covenant. It had this special effect of like, light and smoke coming out of the Ark. It's pretty cool. This is a reproduction of the temple. It's probably only a fourth of the size of the real temple. But and they had a scriptorium, a very amazing and impressive collection of ancient biblical artifacts. Unfortunately, the Holy Land Experience didn't survive COVID. It's been closed down. It's going to be. I think it's still standing there, but it's going to be demolished. Sadly, honestly, I wonder what I think that those artifacts are very impressive. I don't know what they're going to do with them. They should probably give them to the either the Creation Museum or the Museum of the Bible in Washington D.C. But they had animatronics, but they also had a very impressive collection of biblical artifacts in the scriptorium and the Holy Land Experience. So it's very unfortunate that COVID hit and that closed down. It's not going to be open again. So that's it. Yay. So that's the. This is the presentation I gave in Dallas. Whew, that's a hard. I had this speaking engagement in Dallas, and Joseph and Joyce were supposed to teach. And it's like, oh, we're going to be out of town that Sabbath. It's like, what? Joseph, I had you listed.
What's the title? So what's the
title of this?
So basically, with Melchizedek and Jesus and the high priest and Herod's temple, that's all
This
about
is the tabernacle. This is the
festival of Tabernacles.
Right, the tabernacle and temple and during the Feast of Sukkot, right? All of this is related to the feast days. So I gave this presentation before Yom Kippur, so I incorporated a lot of Yom Kippur into it, right? But
Because Yom Kippur was before.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that was a week ago, but I was incorporating. It's about tabernacles and Yom Kippur, right, together in this presentation because, well, they're all related. Trumpets, Yom Kippur, and these are the high holy days. But now we're in tabernacles. But we looked at the tabernacle and we looked at the next manifestation, of what the tabernacle was, the temple. Of course, there's no temple anymore. The only thing we have, the Samaritans, I need to look into that, They have a high priest. They do a Passover sacrifice, but I don't know what they do about Yom Kippur. They had a temple too, but it was tore down in the Roman period. But I want to look into that. It's like, how do the Samaritans observe Yom Kippur?